Welcome back and thank you so much for the support on part 1. If you're unaware, this is part 2 of pitching the Sinister Six for Marvel Rivals, and so many people had some great ideas for how they'd handle some of the members, or just who they wanted to see in these videos. For those of you who haven't seen part 1, it will be linked in the description below, but feel free not only to go and watch it and come back now, but to wait until after this video and watch it. You might get some spoilers as to who the villains were in that video, but other than that, it's still worth a watch. With all that being said, let's just get right into the video. Before we dive into our first hero, I'll just do a quick recap on the rules I set before. So we have a 2-2-2 comp in the Sinister Six lineup, leaving one of each role for this video to be covered. Also, we won't be giving details on damage numbers or ammo counts, or exact number details of any kind, since those would regularly be changed in buffs and nerfs each season to match like the meta of the game. Finally, this is like all for fun, and just to make something creative and celebrate this brilliant game. Sorry to interrupt the video, but I'm in the middle of editing and you guys have given so many brilliant pitches and ideas of your own, and you not only smashed my personal sub goal of hitting 100 subscribers, but I then set myself a goal of reaching that 500 mark, and before this video even came out, we're already halfway there. I just wanted to say thank you again and to acknowledge all of these awesome ideas you've all put forward. So later on, there'll be a poll and you guys can vote on which pitch I do next in a future video. And with all that covered, let's talk about a villain I just knew I had to include. A necessary member of the Six in almost all adaptations, and somehow a fan favourite Spidey villain without ever really having like an extremely large plotline or story for Spidey. This is our second duelist, and the living live wire himself, Electro.
I hate this song!
Maxwell Dillon, aka Electro, is a unique case for a supervillain. He doesn't have some personal or altruistic agenda, nor is he pure evil. No, Electro kind of just wants power, or at least as much as he can get. Now, going into the pitch itself, I really wanted to go for that classic green and yellow zany version of the character. Obviously touched up for the rival's art style, but still vibrant and ever bright. As for how he's going to play, I'd imagine he'd be all about that uncontrollable element we find in electricity, and then manipulating it to cover as much damage as possible. But conceptual rambles aside, let's actually get into the pitch, starting off with his primary fire, of course. Now, Electro will have more than one type of fire, but the first one is alternating current. This lets him fire out a continuous beam of electricity. This beam will then arc to enemies near it. Now, what I mean by this is it's kind of like a straight laser. Think Iron Man's Unibeam almost, where he picks a target and he just fires an electrical beam to them. However, if any enemies are in between him and the enemy he's targeting, and they are close to the beam will begin to curve and bend into them, damaging them as well. Like how electricity arcs to things that move near it. Now, alternative to this, he has direct current, which is kind of like a burst shot attack that fires 1 to 5 bolts, dependent on what voltic charge he currently has. Voltic charge being a passive, I might as well explain now. So, whenever Electro fires energy of any kind through one of his abilities known as Lightning Rod, he slowly begins to build up a percentage bar of voltic charge. Now, voltic charge is displayed to the player underneath the reticle on the screen. It'll be a percentage of 0 to 100. Once it hits 20%, he can start using direct current. Direct current will use up all of what he currently has. At 20%, it will fire 1 bolt. At 100, it fires 5. Every installment of 20%, upping the amount of bolts he fires. Now, of course, his basic attack and his passive are not the only features in this kit. He has that lightning rod I just told you about. Now, the lightning rod is a metal rod. Electro will have access to probably around 4 of these, and whenever he fires alternating current near one, it will arc to the lightning rod as though it was a player, and then beam out to other lightning rods. Once electricity hits a lightning rod, even if Electro stops firing, it will stay emerging from that lightning rod for a short period of time. This is considered to be electrified. When electrified, lightning rods will zap lightning between each other, creating a tripwire that, if enemies walk through, take damage, and these tripwires will also arc towards enemies. This is kind of how he builds up his Voltic charge. So think less like Moon Knight's Unks, where you fire at them and then it bursts out, and it's kind of like the reverse of that. You fire at your enemies, and then the lightning goes from the enemy into the lightning rod, and then all your lightning rods interconnect, building a maze of electricity. This is something that I sort of thought about when I thought, well, in most depictions, we tend to see Electro firing bolts across a massive battlefield that Spidey-S uses Spidey sensors to dodge. And how do I make this into a kit if not through having these lightning rods you place and creating your own electrical grid? His lightning isn't the only thing that can move through these. Thanks to Electro's ability Livewire, Electro himself can transform into electricity and then dash into a nearby lightning rod. Once he does this, if there are other lightning rods around, similarly to how his own lightning would work, he will fire between those rods until there's no more. Whenever he's in a lightning rod and there are no more lightning rods for him to jump to, it will shoot him out in the direction he's facing, giving him a bit of distance. This would be mainly his mobility. He could use this to get in or out of combat, or if you have set up these lightning rods in a particular positioning, you theoretically could use it as a rollout if they weren't currently being used, to deal with opponents. And then we have his final cooldown, EMP. This will also play into his Voltic charge feature. EMP unleashes a powerful electrifying pulse, and all enemies within a very short radius of Electro have their cooldowns disabled. Now, the amount of time they're disabled for is completely determined by how much Voltic charge he had. I don't know specifically what I would make the max time, but that would be determined at 100% Voltic charge, and then as the Voltic charge goes down in increments of say 10%, the amount in which their cooldowns are disabled lowers to match. Now, of course, when you're doing well as Electro and you are constantly putting out this damage, electrifying people, getting your lightning rods into the right space, eventually you're going to build up that ultimate, and you can enter Electric Incarnate. Now, Electric Incarnate transforms Electro into Ultimate Electro, or Electro 2.0, and while in this state you glow blue, sort of reference the Ultimate comics, and you gain the ability to fly. Now, on top of this, you will generate Voltic charge naturally, continuously, kind of like Sojourn in Overwatch, how her ult works. And then in addition, the final feature this ult has put in place is all your enemies will act like lightning rods. So you can live wire through the enemies, and when you fire alternating current, it will move through them as though they were lightning rods. Now, this lasts for a short period of time. I'm thinking roughly around that sort of like legendary ult that Star-Lord has, roughly around that sort of period of time, but I don't know. And then once it stops, you stop being blue and fall back down to the ground. And then finally, we have his team-up abilities. Now, he's the only case on this video where this is a scenario, but he only has one team-up ability that I came up with. If you guys have some really fun ones, some really cool ones, please do let me know in the comments. I'm sure you can all come up with some amazing ideas for some team abilities for Electro. But right now, the only one on here is Sinister Power, which, since it's a team ability with the other two characters we're going to be talking about in this video, it's going to have to wait till the very end. Now, the next slot was originally going to go to Rhino as our second tank, or Vanguard. And I do apologise to any of you Rhino fans out there. I really wanted to put him in this, and he was definitely a pick that I had off the bat. I was telling myself 100% Rhino's going to be on this team. He's an obvious Vanguard. And he is an obvious Vanguard. But as I was building him, I began to realise everything I wanted for the Rhino kit were features I wanted for a different character. a character who I do intend to one day do in a different video. And I began to realise, outside of the charging mechanic, there wasn't a lot I could do to really make him too interesting. Now I'm sure you guys could come up with some amazing kits, and I'd love to hear your pitches for Rhino. But that's not who we're about to talk about, no. Instead, let's talk about arguably one of Spidey's least recognised villains, even though they have been in so many of his villain team-ups, even though they've been in so many of his video games and have even made an on-screen movie appearance. That's right, we're talking about Shocker.
Oops, guess we're stuck in here for a while. Want to play 20 questions? No? How about we thumb it? Okay, face punch it is. Whoa! Your gauntlets are all digital now, aren't they?
Have it your way. You wanna fight? Let's fight!
Herman Schultz is the Shocker, and he is an incredibly underrated Spidey foe. And he acts as a face for the lesser villains within Spidey's gallery, which, as many of you will know, is incredibly expansive. I know a lot of you might be a bit confused as to why he's a vanguard, but please let me explain. First of all, his gauntlets let him stun and push around foes, controlling his opponent's agility to dive in and keeping them generally at bay. And then, as for design, when it comes to vanguarding him up, well, just look at some of the designs he's had in the past. Herman isn't always some slim DPS looking guy. And then personally, I'd love to have some interesting proportions come from his gloves. Like, look at this cool artwork I found, and how his gauntlets are oversized. I could talk all day about why this could work. So how about instead, we talk about what I actually came up with. First off, we have his basic attack. His Vibro Shock gauntlets. These are the staple of the Shocker. He doesn't have superpowers like a lot of the villains in the Marvel Universe tend to. He's solely gadget reliant, and those are his Vibro Shock gauntlets. What these allow him to do are send out a series of punches that feel like a semi-truck, and they let him do it at a distance. So the way Herman would work is he'd initially be a brawler type character, melee only, but every time he successfully lands a hit on an opponent, his distance, his range increases. So by his reticle, Herman would have 4 markers, and they would start off unfilled, and then every time he successfully hits an opponent, a marker would fill in. Kind of think how Cap's markers do. And for every marker filled in, his punches reach 5 meters further. So he can then punch you from further and further and further away. When it comes to losing these markers, every time Herman misses a hit, he loses a marker, and then also after a few seconds, the markers start to disappear every couple seconds. So if he's out of combat for too long, they go down 1, 2, 3, or if he misses a hit, he loses 1. But for every successful hit, he regains 1. Of course, the basic attack is a good way to figure out the kind of way a character fights, but it doesn't tell you how they're going to work in the game. So let's just get straight onto his cooldowns. But starting off with Torrent. So Torrent is kind of how he keeps you at bay, and he also gets people off those he doesn't want them fighting. This is his knockback ability. Kind of think Invisible Woman's super push, right? Now, he can't use this to pull people in, but it would deal significantly more damage than something like Invisible Woman's push. And it's got a good force behind it. The idea here is you really do throw someone off of the person they're beating up. And then what you can do is you can combo this in with his next cooldown, Deafening Blow. Deafening Blow would work quite well when you're using your basic attacks as well, but what this is it's a super heavy shot, but it has a bit of charge-up time. So he pulls his fist back and builds it up and fires out one really powerful shot. And enemies hit by it are stunned for a short duration. So you can knock someone back, hit them with a deafening blow, and then use that to sort of close the distance, get those vibro shock hits in, and pull yourself back to having that space. Realistically, what Herman's going to be about with these two abilities in his basic attack is shortening and then extending distances and trying to keep people at that sort of mid-range, but making sure he's safe in case he's dealing with a brawler. People like Iron Fist and Wolverine, he's going to be able to use Torrent and Deafening Blow to get them off of him. But then characters who might prefer a lot of range, he's going to be able to run straight in after they've been stunned by Deafening Blow and make sure he can actually get those hits that he needs. Now when it comes to running straight in and dealing with that, or when it comes to running out of the combat as well, he's going to need a little bit of mobility, and he does have a power for that. Vortex Blast. Inspired kind of by when you're chasing him in the Spider-Man PS4 games, I'm not gonna lie, where he bleeps with the power of a shock. This is exactly that. Herman fires his fists down and launches himself forwards and in the air, kind of doing a big jump. Kind of think like Hulk's leap, only instead of having to charge it up for distance, it's like a preset. You press the button and it fires him. Vortex Blast doesn't deal damage in any way, it's just a mobility, but he also doesn't get a lot of it. He is a Vanguard, he's not going to be able to just run around everywhere willy-nilly, but this does help him get in or get out of certain scenarios. All of this is coupled with his passive ability, Shock Absorption. So Shocker always takes reduced damage from melee attacks. This helps him when he's trying to get those initial hits in, but on top of this, once his Vibroshock gauntlets reach maximum range, his shock absorption affects ranged attacks as well. So initially he's just going to take reduced damage from characters who are either meleeing him, or characters who exclusively have melee attacks, like Wolverine and Iron Fist. But once you get those Vibro Shocks all the way up, he's going to start having a damage reduction on basically everything that hits him. As Shocker, you've controlled what your enemy can and can't do, you've punished those you've been able to stun, and you've tried to soak up as much damage on the battlefield as possible, and your ultimate is ready. Relentless Thunder. When this is activated, Shocker leaps into the air, and downwards in front of him he fires a massive supersonic shockwave. This creates a radius effect, and everyone, or more like a cone actually, and everyone inside of it is initially hit with a large chunk of damage. Following that, they are slowed and receive consistent chip damage. Now I could also imagine instead of taking the damage and being slowed, they just are full on stunned while they're inside it, but I kind of think that chip damage and slowed would be more beneficial to the gameplay as it is. This is sort of to emulate that boss fight feel when he jumps in the air and fires massive blasts down at you and sort of just holds them there. So that's what I'm sort of going with that, the idea being that he's just unleashing his gauntlets at full power. As we all know, Marvel Rivals has this really fun mechanic where your kit isn't everything you bring to the table. If your friends pick certain characters, you get even more. And that's where team-up abilities come in, as you know. So starting off, we have Sinister Heights. This is, just like Electro's one, the team ability we're going to be talking about at the end of the video. He does have his own unique team ability in the form of Vibrational Rebound. As long as he's on a team with Captain America, he gains access to this power, and basically the idea here would be Shocker's like re-engineered his gauntlet inspired off of Cap's energy shield. And what this acts as is it's an ability that goes on cooldown after he uses it, and it's a parry where he just reflects something that hits him. Kind of think Genji's reflect in Overwatch, or how Cap uses the shield when someone attacks him in Marvel Rivals. Here, instead of it holding up like Cap shield, it is a timing game where you do have to press it roughly at the right time, but Shocker will do a quick burst of energy and it will reflect whatever he's shot at with. This will be really useful in scenarios where, say, an Iron Man maximum pulses you, or say you just need a little second to get around a corner and you're being pelted at by a Punisher turret. You could just quickly tap that right as you go around that last corner. Or if you're an insane player, you could try your best to try and, caution to the wind and reflect back Hawkeye arrows and whatnot. But yeah, that's Shocker, and I'd love to know what you guys think of him. However, we do have one last character to talk about. But before I let you know who that is, I will say to you guys, I mentioned it earlier, there is a poll in the video, and it's on who you want me, or what kind of characters you want me to pitch in the next one of these types of videos. Now, the channel isn't just going to be Marvel Rivals pitches, there'll be other creative, fun, geeky stuff on here. In fact, the next video probably won't be a Marvel Rivals pitch video, but after that we'll probably do another one just to bring it back. And I want you guys to decide who we're going to be focusing on in that video, whether it's the cosmic side, or whether you want me to go back and do some more mutants, ones I didn't cover before. Or if you want me to have a look into the more obscure side of Marvel, pick out some really lesser known picks from the comics. Or if you guys would be more interested in, say, seeing something like DC characters pitched for Marvel Rivals, you let me know, and then I'll try and focus on that in the next video. But we do have a strategist to focus on. Not just any strategist, but one who is a master of mentalism, a connoisseur in the art of trickery, illusion, and deception. That's right, the final member of our Sinister Six lineup is none other than Quentin Beck, Mysterio.
You told me you were just a kid. You told me. Run after that girl.
Help me!
MJ!
Peter, what's going on?
I know this isn't real!
Do you though?
MJ! MJ!
Mysterio is an interesting character, mostly because of his ties to the mystical and occult, but then a clear separation at times. In most cases, he's a fraud, or at least a performer, and a magician, you know? But then, in some, he's a practitioner of real magic. I'm going to be looking at an interpretation where we really don't care if the magic is real or not. What's actually going to be important is the kind of magic it's meant to be, which are illusions and the art of deception. And I don't think I'm alone in that. Having seen the comments of last video, it seems a lot of you guys have ideas for Mysterio somewhat similar to mine, all focused on the idea of trickery and confusion. So that begs the question, how does one create an illusionist in a hero shooter? Starting off with his primary fire, Mysterio is much like someone along the lines of Jeff, where he has two alternate fires based on which buttons you press. His primary being Uncanny Arcana is a burst fire of 4 magical bolts. Hitting allies heals them with these, and hitting enemies does damage. Basically kind of like Luna's Ice Blasts, right? But he also has Fog of Mystery. Now, when he presses his alternate fire button, he releases the fog, which is a sort of thick smoke screen that grants his allies damage boost and it slows his enemies. I imagine it wouldn't be like obscuring in the same way as, say, a Punisher smokescreen would be, but that's not really the intention of it. What is the intention is it fills an area that people can walk through that boosts your allies and debuffs your enemies. Of course, the trade-off for this being he can only use one of these fires at a time. The fog would have, while he holds the button, a ticker counting down, much like Jeff's water beam, that would cause him to reload, and then the Uncanny Arcana would have a limited number of times he can fire it before he has to do his little reload animation. Now, of course, that doesn't lean into any of what we've been saying about trickery or confusion. That's just how he works as our support here, our strategist, being able to deal damage and heal our allies whilst boosting and modifying them. No, his trickery and illusions come in the form of his many abilities. So let's just get right into those. Starting off with Now You See Me, Mysterio readies a smoky ball in his hand. And whilst he's holding this, he'll have 2 button prompts. He can either press 1 and throw the smoky orb ahead, teleporting to it, leaving behind where he stood a thick fog cloud, and where he's now teleported to a thick fog cloud. Or he can press the other button, where the exact same thing happens, but he doesn't teleport. This way, your opponent can't quite tell whether you've teleported to the new location or stayed where you were. The alternative benefit of this as well is whichever fog cloud you don't end up in, so if you teleport the one you were in before, and if you don't teleport just where you threw the orb to, will have a healing effect on the fog. So when you're outside of direct combat, you can use Now You See Me to throw a smoke ball at your allies and fill that area with healing gas. Whilst if you are currently in conflict, you could choose to teleport out of conflict or to throw the orb and have your opponent make the choice to run and look at that new location instead of where you currently are. I think like comboing Now You See Me with something like a cloak invisibility temporarily could really confuse your opponent and help you. The other idea here obviously is the smoke that it does create and leave behind would be along the lines of that Punisher smokescreen, so your opponent can't directly see which choice you've made immediately anyway. So even if you do stay and they are going to notice that you stayed, you can get in a few extra shots and that might be a game changer for you. But this is all met with his secondary ability. An ability I tried really hard to distinguish and make unique from a character like Loki, for example. And this is Mysterio's illusory clones. You see, Mysterio can target an ally and create a clone of them. The clone mimics their movements and actions but cannot interact with anything. This basically means that it won't heal allies, it won't damage enemies, and it won't provide shield or abilities per se. It just visually mimics your allies. These clones don't have health bars, and since it doesn't interact with anything, they can walk through walls and enemies can walk through them. Now, alone, other than the odd confused glance, illusory clones on their own won't actually do anything. But they combine with Mysterio's secondary ability, Bamboozle. Mysterio at any time can press Bamboozle, and the hero he currently has an illusory clone of will swap locations with their clone. This is kind of like how Loki can swap with his own clones, only Mysterio controls who's being swapped. The idea here is the hero will keep acting as though they're in the fight, pressing the fire button, whereas the opponent will take a moment to actually realize the hero has swapped places. It's more so of a pull your ally out of danger to save them type move, but it does have that added flavor and the occasional come up scenario where there is a case of thinking that they're still fighting the person when they're not. Now, of course, when you reach a certain point in the game, basically above bronze, people are gonna very quickly notice when a clone swaps with the actual hero, but for the most part, it's about saving them from the danger anyway. Now, of course, this isn't Mysterio's entire kit. He does have a couple more features. First of all, Hypnosis. This is very similar to Mantis's sleep ability, but with quite a short range, but affecting everyone within that range. This would be a small motion that Mysterio would perform, and a burst would occur around him. Everyone within this very small radius would then be basically put to sleep. If they're dealt damage, they wake up, and also after a few seconds, they wake up again. And then to round off the kit, we have Skywalk. See, while in the air, Mysterio can press the jump button again to suddenly stop falling. Once he does this, he can walk freely for a certain duration of time, with clouds of smoke at his feet. If he jumps again whilst doing this, he immediately begins to fall once more. Of course, what this means is with Skywalk, you can run to where you need to go. If someone jumps on you, you can quickly hypnotize them to get away, or you can teleport out of there for safety. You see your allies in the distance getting beaten up, you can create an illusory clone of them, and then either throw a smoke ball in to heal with your own primary fire, or, if you really wanted, you could swap them. And then you could teleport somewhere else and heal them with the fog after swapping them with their clones. A ton of different options, all to bring out the idea of Mysterio tricking and creating illusions. And eventually, this builds up to his ultimate, the Prestige. The Prestige is the grand show Mysterio has gone for. And something I realized when writing it is I went back and had a look at the comments and ideas some of you guys pitched, and I realized so many of you had very similar ideas to me with slight differences, sure, but I'm not alone in seeing this. A lot of people seem to really want Mysterio to turn everyone into Mysterios. It's exactly where I went with it, and it seems other people did too. The art of tricking your opponent, the best thing you could possibly do is have them hurt their teammates. And that's kind of what this is all about. So the Prestige has Mysterio summon a giant dome in the shape of like a Mysterio helmet, right? Over the battlefield. All heroes inside the dome will appear as Mysterio. And in addition, enemies cannot tell friend or foe, so they won't have the colour outline. Whilst within the dome, heroes also have friendly fire turned on. So what this means is your allies can tell who are friends and who aren't, but your opponents can't, and in addition, your opponents can hurt each other. So you can actually use this to trick your opponents into hunting each other. If you misplace it, people are going to remember who they were fighting and where their allies stood. But if you don't misplace it, or if people just get confused in the heat of battle, this can lead to an enemy team helping you wipe them. It can be incredibly useful, and it just sounds, I'm not gonna lie, like a lot of fun and like a proper Mysterio boss fight, which is kind of what I want from these ults. I really want these characters to feel like if you were to face off against them as a boss. Now, when it comes to appearance and how everyone looking like Mysterio would sort of come off, I imagine it would just be like everyone has that sort of character model of like a Mysterio with crossed arms, or maybe him taunting you or something, and the attacks you do don't actually like move or match to the motions, and that way it works a bit better and everyone would have sort of the Mysterio hitbox. An alternate way of handling it would to be, while everyone's in the dome, they all have the same type of fire or something, so they straight up are just a weaker version of Mysterio, basically. I prefer the idea that just the character model doesn't match the attacks, but if that's something you do care about, then I guess that's the alternative way of doing it. But, as I've said 5 times before, the character is not their moves alone. They do have team-ups in Marvel Rivals, one of the most interesting concepts, and the whole reason for this two-parter. So, let's have a look at Mysterio's team-ups. Well, we have Sinister Performance, which I'm going to get on in a moment, but he also has a separate team-up ability, Arcane Resemblance. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I made this team-up just wanting him to have something to do with the other 2 spellcasters in the game before I came up with what it does, and I'm not particularly happy with what it does, might I add, but I just wanted him to have a team up with Scarlet Witch and the Sorcerer Supreme. That being said, I did give them a feature nonetheless. Basically, in this case, Doctor Strange would be the anchor, and Scarlet Witch and Mysterio would gain what is pretty much ammo increases. Scarlet Witch would gain an extra amount of chaos magic, that being her like higher damaging bolts, and the way it would affect Mysterio would be his Uncanny Arcana fires more bolts than 4 in the burst shot. This is why I specified 4 bolts when I said burst, instead of just saying a burst shot, even though I don't particularly want to get into the numbers. It's straight up just because this team ability. But I am turning to you guys. Last video, you really went to the extremes of giving me your ideas on how you'd handle not only the characters I pitched, but characters I didn't even mention. So I want to see how you'd handle a team up with these 3 characters. I'm really interested to see your creativity flourish. Some of you guys came up with entirely different builds and kits for the characters I pitched, and I'm so happy to see that, and I was so glad to read that. So go ahead. Not only can you come up with your own Mysterio, come up with your own team up ability. I'd like to see how it works. So, with the second Sinister Six team-up ability, I was thinking about the idea of Mysterio once again being the anchor. That does mean on both our Sinister Six team abilities, the supports are the anchor characters, which is something I really didn't want to lean into. It just kind of happened, but I'll get to that more after I've told you what the team-up is. Mysterio, having seen Doc Ock work alongside so closely with Sandman and Kraven, felt he too is an excellent engineer and a master of design, and he can come up with his own stuff. And with Electro and Shocker not really being involved too much, he'd bring them on board, using Electro's power and ability to overcharge Mysterio's drone technology, and Shocker's unique designs and engineering capabilities. He was able to create mini drones for the other Sinister members. These mini drones hover around them, and when they activate the ability, they transform into Mysterio. Basically, what this means is at any point, Mysterio can look at either Shocker or Electro and press the team-up button. And what then happens is that character will appear like Mysterio, and they gain access to Mysterio's Skywalk ability. Now, if they attack, use any of their normal hero abilities, or take damage, they immediately turn back to themselves. But until then, they are almost indistinguishable from Mysterio. So basically, this lets you hide a Vanguard or a Duelist as a strategist. You could have Shocker stood in the backlines waiting as he sees they're on the defensive and now the enemies are coming to attack, and he can quickly surprise them. Or you could have Electro use Skywalk to just get to a good vantage point to throw down a lightning rod. These sorts of ideas I think are really cool, but like I said before, I'm not too happy with my team-ups both being from the strategist point of view. And I think there's a ton of alternate possibilities we could come up with. So just like I asked you with Mysterio's team-up ability, I want to hear your guys' ideas for the second Sinister Six team-up power. And I have a secondary pitch for you guys. I want one of you, at least in the comments, to come up with a really fun idea for the Sinister Six team ability where all 6 members are included. And the best one that I see, I'll mention on the next Marvel Rivals pitch video. I'll flag it up right at the end there, and I'll show everyone what you pitched. Honestly, I'm loving all the creativity this is building in the comments. I'm having fun being creative with it. And I said earlier that the next video probably won't be a Marvel Rivals pitch video, but I'm definitely continuing with these. After we get the feedback from the poll, I'll be right on top of it. But with that being said, thank you all for watching. Please like, you guys have done such a good job subscribing, and if you're new to the channel, please subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.